Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It is 25 to 2. This is Times at 1 with Dominic O'Connell on Times Radio. Now, nearly 1 in 5 homes in England and Wales are leaseholds, and leaseholds have many critics, including the Labour government. Ministers want to abolish what they call a feudal system, which leaves occupants facing unexpected and sometimes unaffordable costs, including service charges, which have been rising significantly. The average service charge is more than £2,300, up 44% since 2016, according to the agents Hamptons. But many leaseholders report increases much greater, 400 to 500%, and annual fees in excess of £10,000. In a few minutes, we'll hear from the freeholders. But first, let's meet the campaigners who want change, starting with Katie Kendrick from the National Leasehold Campaign. Katie, we're already getting a lot of feedback from listeners on service charges. Just tell us what you see as the problems with service charges. First of all, just what they are.
Yeah, so obviously a service charge is to provide a service to a block of flats. But actually what we're seeing is that people are being billed astronomical amounts of money for services that they aren't receiving. And when you question the services, obviously you have to go through the tribunal to challenge them, and it's really costly and lengthy. And literally the managing agents here work for the freeholders, which have all of the control. The leaseholders simply just pay the bill or expected to pay these bills, which are not justifiable bills. No leaseholder has any qualms with paying for services to maintain their blocks. But at the moment, what we're seeing is a decrease in service and increasing service charges.
What kind of increases are you seeing? Because if you talk about, obviously there's been inflation in costs, and construction costs have gone up over since the pandemic, and particularly since the pandemic. But what kind of increases are your members and supporters reporting?
Like you've just said, 300-400% increases. Obviously, the building safety issues has had significant impact on the service charges. People's insurances have gone up. Insurance commissions, basically money for nothing, just kickbacks off people's insurances. It's absolutely outrageous. I've just seen one today, and the breakdown shows salaries of £63,000 and a management charge of £115. Aren't they the same thing? It's just an absolute license to print money.
It's often a bit of a divide and conquer thing, isn't it? Because tenants are individuals, and there could be, maybe 100 of them or more, and they're fighting individually against a single managing agent.
Of course they are. At the end of the day, these managing agents, they work for the freeholders. So in order for a leaseholder to challenge the reasonableness of their service charge, they have to take them to the first tier tribunal. They're also responsible for all of the freeholders' legal fees as well. So there's absolutely no incentive to A, go to the tribunal, or B, for the freeholders to actually act in a timely manner. So it's just a really drawn out process, and the end of the bill goes right back to the leaseholder, and the whole cycle just starts again with the next year's service charge. It's literally a revolving door.
And just as an aside, there is quite a long waiting time for any of these tribunals to hear a case, isn't there?
Absolutely, yes. They are really behind, and the whole process of tribunal is also very off-putting for a leaseholder. It's just not in proportion to the amount that you're challenging, the amount of the fees that the freeholders will recoup, and they'll charge the leaseholders for them taking them to the FTT in the following year's service charge. So they just recoup their costs at every single angle.
Thank you very much, Katie Kendrick from the National Leasehold Campaign. We're also joined by the former Conservative MP, Sir Peter Bottomley, who has long campaigned for reform of leaseholds. He joins me now. Peter, thank you very much for joining us. Just remind us what happened, because Michael Gove, when Housing Secretary, was planning to change things quite substantially, but it never quite happened. What happened to that?
Well, he got a bill in Parliament, and it came out in the end, but half of it was cut off because of the sudden general election. And it mixes two things. One is what you do with the changing the laws. Katie Kendrick clearly shows is absolutely vital. And the second thing is what you do about the fire safety and other building defects. You have to remember the residential leaseholder never owns a brick in the building, yet they have to pay for the insurance, and they're being left with the remedial costs of putting right bad cladding or other fire defects or other deficiencies. The whole thing is completely screwy.
The leasehold, sorry, the freeholders and the managing agents would say, listen, these costs have escalated. We need to pass it on. And anyway, if there's an excess in the maintenance fund, it should go back to the leaseholders anyway. Do you think that happens in practice?
No. Buildings need maintenance, and I always advise anyone buying a leasehold, and I'd advise anyone who in future buys a common hold, you need to think about setting aside about 4% of the capital value each year for long-term maintenance. You don't spend all each year, but lifts need replacing, roofs need redoing, and things go wrong. What you can't get back are sky-high insurance commissions that Katie and the National Leasehold Campaign have talked about. And if you read the website of the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, the campaigning charity, who've been working with me, and I've been working with them for over a decade, they'll show various other ways in which bad landlords, bad freeholders make bad decisions and then challenge leaseholders who challenge them. The whole thing shouldn't have been started by William II. It should have been put right many kings and queens ago. Let's do it now, basically. So tell your MP, get involved in the leasehold campaign, get involved in the group, and get the government to take further action. I know that the Minister, Matthew Pennycook, wants to. We need to make sure there's effective action. And we also need to get these judges at the tribunals to stop making decisions which get reversed or should be reversed. There's too many where the individual leaseholder, when they do fight successfully, end up paying the bill of the bad people who've been screwing them.
What do you think? We don't have a time machine, so unfortunately we can't go back those hundreds of years. But what would you actually like to see happen? A complete change in the law, ending the freehold-leasehold split?
Well, that I think is a secondary thing. You've got to find ways of you need to make the terms of enfranchisement, buying your freehold or very long lease, such that it's in the interest of freeholders to sell willingly rather than to resist. So if you make the value of the freehold a diminishing asset rather than an increasing asset, you've got them. Secondly, you've got to have Parliament set down a rate of interest for extending leases or buying the freehold, which takes away the marriage value and takes away the sort of speculative values which were there when interest rates were very low, so capital values were very high. I think now we've got medium rate interest rates, we ought to be able to enshrine that in law so that freeholders will be coming to leaseholders saying, will you please buy at a fair price your freehold? Well,
we'll see if the Labour government takes that agenda on. Thank you very much, Sir Peter Bottomley, the former Conservative MP. What about the freeholders' point of view? Nigel Glenn is from the Residential Freehold Association. He represents a large number of professional freeholders. He's a former boss of one of the managing agents groups, ARMA, A-R-M-A. Here's his take on why service charges have risen so fast.
It is a difficult issue. You've got inflation in there, which over the same period was about 31%. But buildings seem to be particularly susceptible to extreme inflation, if you see what I mean. So you've got things like utilities. If I look at the three things that really affected service charges, utilities, so we had Ukraine. Buildings insurance is a big one. Lots of people blame fire for that. If you look at the stats, it's actually water. So claims from water have gone from an average of a few thousand to 30,000. So buildings insurance premiums are a really big one. And the third big contributor is on-site staff. So trying to get hold of staff, specialist constructors, et cetera, is very, very difficult. So it is unfortunate. It does seem to be affecting buildings more than the general population.
The other big shift in the industry, which probably predates 2016, is the increasing financialisation of freeholds. Large investors like the Cengiz brothers, through consensus, have gone into this and turned it into much more of a profit-making thing. It was quite a sleepy industry, and now they want some money out of it. Isn't really it down to that more aggressive drive for profit?
No, service charges are completely outside that. So from my own experience, what you do is you set a budget for the year and you say, I think it's going to be, let's say, £100,000 for this property. And you base that on your experience. But if you only spend 90, you don't keep the 10, you give it back to the leaseholders. So there is actually no profit per se in service charges. Contractors make profits, et cetera, et cetera. That's a capitalist world. But there is no profit per se in a service charge itself.
Self-management is another option, potentially. Tenants getting together to manage their own apartment block brings its own problems, of course.
Yes, it's a two-edged sword. Where I live, we have self-managed, and some of us wistfully wish we hadn't, I'm afraid. There are pros and cons. Obviously, self-management, you feel that you're in control. A myth I would like to dispel is people kind of say, oh, if you self-manage, our service charges will be slashed. One of the things I did when I was running Armour is I looked at the service charges for 250,000 homes in blocks of 10 or above. And actually, when you self-manage, your service charges went up. It's a lot of work. I've been on boards. If people say, "Oh, it's easy," they're fibbing to you. It is a lot of work. You've got a lot of responsibility, and it can get quite uncomfortable because if you're chasing somebody for a bad debt, that's your neighbour, and you meet them in the postbox room. So it's dispute resolution tends to get a little bit more personal.
That was Nigel Glenn from the Residential Freehold Association.